Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to London DevOps number 59. This is I think if my maths is correct, this is the 10th meetup we're having virtually. So we got to the fine old number of number 50 when we had a marvelous event up at Deloitte back in February or March 2020. And then of course the world changed, so we went online. So yeah, our 10th event online, 59th in total. I would be lying if I said that the virtual events were as good as the face-to-face ones, but we give it a good stab, I think. I think we're all surviving and getting on with things and doing what we can. But yeah, I can't wait to get back out there, meet all you guys again and girls, and have a good time talking about things and having a beer and some pizza. We've started doing a little bit of planning, actually. Might as well talk about that around what the world looks like once lockdown restrictions are lifted here in London. So we've got a few options for venues. We're not going to rush into it, though. We know not everyone's going to want to go to a physical meetup straight away after the restrictions are lifted. So no firm, massive plans for that yet. And rest assured that if we do start running physical events, then we're going to have a much more enhanced virtual option than what we used to have at our physical events. So yeah, number 59, we're here to talk about DevOps. I'll just go through these slides. I know a lot of people have seen these before, but I'm going to go through them again because we've got some new people on whose names I don't recognize. So people who are new, so let's just go through what we're doing here. So here's a definition of DevOps. Like many of us here have probably heard so many different definitions of DevOps that makes your eyes bleed somewhat. This is one of my favorites from Ken at ThoughtWorks. That's kind of what DevOps is, a cultural thing. Another one, a slightly more sweary one here from John Vincent, around giving a bleep about your job enough to not pass the buck and learn not just your own little bit of the world. Another possible definition of DevOps. You might think that DevOps is about culture. I put this slide, well, somebody put this slide in, it might be Mark, sorry, years ago about a book by someone called Mandi who we talk about a lot. And we mention Mandi every single meetup because she's on this slide.
Yeah, I think that was you.
Was it me?
Yeah.
Well, what a great idea by me. Probably somebody else's idea, but I did it. But yes, brilliant book by Mandi Walls. And finally, Mandi is here. Mandi's spoken for us before at meetups, so we're really glad to have her back. But yes, there's a direct link to one of the key people in the DevOps world who's actually speaking for us tonight. So that's a great thing. So DevOps, yeah, maybe it's this horrible tools map for you. Personally, I think it's a big combination of people, process, and tools. Doesn't really matter if you agree with me. Because, that sounded terrible. It doesn't really matter if you agree with me because we've all got our own different versions, our own views of what it is, what it isn't, and that's all good. We all exist in the worlds that we work in, and hopefully what we go through tonight will be useful, given whatever your particular flavor of DevOps is. So London DevOps has been around since 2014 in its current incarnation. So, yep, going well. 6.5 years. When Mark picked it up off the floor and asked me to help him run it. Thank you so much. Love it. That's what we're here for. Share knowledge, to meet new people, and to help out. All these things, again, they're harder over Zoom. It's not quite the same thing. But do what we can. You may have noticed that this is a Zoom meeting and not a Zoom webinar. That's a very conscious decision. The webinars where you get the likes of me and Mark and Alex and Jack and Mandy speaking, and nobody else gets to contribute really, apart from in a little chat window. We don't believe in that. So it's a proper meeting. So if you want to say something, then come off mute and say something. Obviously, please don't interrupt the speakers. But yeah, it's a community effort. It's there for you to engage and talk and discuss things. So that's what we're all about. Everything is shareable unless indicated otherwise. Sometimes Chatham House rules apply, but not usually. Here's our YouTube channel. This has got a collection of pretty much every single meetup we've done since 2014. Screenshot is now very out of date, given it talks about meetup number 28 and we're on 59 now. But what we do have is a nice new shiny URL. So thank you to a few people, David Lippier at Adaptivist and Mark, also for helping us sort that out. So there you go, youtube.com/c/London Devops. That's where you can find us on our new shiny channel URL. So yeah, we're recording this now. At least I'm hoping we're recording it. There is a red light on for everybody else, isn't there? I can't see because I'm sharing. Thank goodness for that. I should have checked that some minutes ago. There we go. So yeah, the video for this will go up shortly afterwards. Oh, there's Mandy's previous talk there. Look, 29.2. Far too long ago. We should have had you on again since then. Code of conduct. Again, I'll just leave that up there. Again, you might be thinking, well, this is a Zoom meeting. It's not like it's a proper meetup, but actually the same thing still applies. And it's worth stating there. So I'll just leave that on the screen for a few more seconds so you can absorb it. There we go. So the meetup, the organisers of the meetup are these four motley gentlemen. Sorry, it's a continued source of embarrassment that it's four white guys running this meetup. If you have any ideas to make that better, please do let us know. So yeah, we're all here. I think Mark might be multitasking a bit, so I'm not sure if he's able to say hello or not.
Yeah, I am here. Hello, everyone. I said welcome to another London DevOps. Hopefully we can do them sooner than later in person.
Amen to that. Jack, are you there?
Yeah, same message as Mark, really. Can't wait to kind of meet everyone again and have the face-to-face events, but thanks for joining us tonight.
Cool, thank you, Jack. And Alex, are you there? Want to say hello?
I'm here. Hi, guys. Welcome to London DevOps. Nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones, as always.
Actually, your screenshot, it's just reminded me a little bit of what I think it might look like at one of OVH's data centers in Strasbourg today. I don't know if anyone saw that rather unfortunate news. It's probably a little too early to joke about it, but damn, I said it. So let's get some social going. Please send out some tweets. There's our hashtag London DevOps. So anything that piques your interest, please put something out there. If you want to, that would be cool. So the sponsors. So yes, we couldn't really do this without sponsors' help. Alex, do you want to say a little bit about Prism? Alex, newly minted as a conference speaker, I believe, today.
Yes. I was at the Blueprint event today, talking about tips and hiring and trends in the DevOps market. So I was pleased with that. I hope some of you guys watched it. If not, I'll be sure to get it on Prism's YouTube as well. We are a talent partner for DevOps and cloud engineers, and for organisations looking to hire in the DevOps and cloud space. So that's what we do. That's our niche. If you're interested in talking about the market or looking to hire DevOps engineers, give me a shout.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex. We're also sponsored by Adaptivist. So Adaptivist is the company who I work for, big Atlassian partner. They were going out into other partnerships as well. We're doing a lot of work, for example, with GitLab and Sonatype at the moment at Adaptivist. But yeah, the key thing that we do is around Atlassian consultancy and hosting, and Adaptivist very generously let me spend a bit of time helping to organize this meetup on a regular basis. So thank you to them. I think there's a few other Adaptivists on the call, so thank you for coming as well. Yeah, any questions about what we do, then yeah, hit me up. Also sponsored by WeShape. Jack, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, just quickly, hi from WeShape. So we're a tech consulting business as well, kind of focusing in the kind of DevOps and cloud native space. So yeah, we work with customers from kind of tech and business advisory all the way down to kind of project implementation. My 2-year-old's here, so I do apologize to everyone. But yeah, so we are hiring at the moment for contractors and perm staff at WeShape. So if you're interested in kind of working on some DevOps work, yeah, drop me a line. But thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jack. And yes, interesting you mentioned your 2-year-old. I remember actually WeShape is just past 2 years as well. So both your 2-year-old and the company 2 years old. Congratulations. Yeah. Okay, O'Reilly also sponsor us. They help us out with supplies, books, and giveaways, again, which we have a mounting pile of for when the world goes back a bit more to normal. So thank you to them. I never noticed he blinks. Has that always been like that?
Yeah, anyway. He does. It's always been like that.
Every day is school day. There you go. Okay, and yes, so today's event we're doing in conjunction with Blueprint London. I'm putting you on the spot here. I didn't plan this, but Andy Steed, if you're there, would you like to come off mute and say something about Blueprint London? If not, that's fine. Just stay silent, and I'll cover it.
Yeah. I don't think he's with us anymore, Matt.
I think that answers that one. Okay. Oh, is he not on the list anymore? All right, fair enough. Okay, so yeah, Blueprint London, virtual event that's running today and tomorrow with a community partner for Blueprint London. It's about cloud native technologies and all that sort of kind of good stuff. So yeah, we've had the first day, has been today, but there's also more tomorrow. So if you're interested, then yeah, head onto their site and have a look. So today's talks, we're going to start off with Mandi, who's going to talk about the best practices for on-call teams, what that looks like in this day and age. Mandi, a long time working for Chef, but now up with PagerDuty, so that'll be an interesting talk. And then following that, we'll have a panel / roundtable / rant about on-call session, doing on-call in 2021. So Mandi will be joined by Tom from Red Hat, Mark from our organizer, Mark. We all know who Mark is. I don't need to explain, do I? We'll be joining that, so we'll have a good old chat about on-call. Again, in that session, please feel free to contribute either through the chat or at an appropriate moment, come off mute and engage. Happy for you to ask us questions or contribute experiences. Any sort of thinking that you want, and especially horror stories. People have always got them around on call. So that's it for the intro. So please do let us know what you think. Give us some feedback. There's 3 different methods of getting in touch with us, either through the meetup.com interface or Twitter. You can tweet with that hashtag, or also just change the hashtag to an at London DevOps is our Twitter, or you can send us one of those good old-fashioned electronic mails to org, that's organisers at londondevops.co.uk. Okay, so that's the end of the intro. I'm all done, so I'm going to shut up now and get out of the way and let Mandi get on with it. Mandi, are you there?
I am here. Thanks, Matt. Let me get myself set up here.
I'm going to get a screen share going and
share.
And let's go.
Find my notes. This is a kind of a new talk. So just kind of as an intro, this is me. If you'd like to get in touch with me at any time. Yeah, the last time I spoke to this group, I was working at Chef, and I now work at PagerDuty. For folks who haven't heard, Chef got acquired in the fall. So that's a whole other story there. So now working at PagerDuty, and one of the things that had come up with some of our customers is that they're new to on-call. And like I'm from an operations background. I was a sysadmin for a long time. I'm like, what are you talking about? You don't understand on-call. I don't even understand that you don't understand it. So we put together some resources here, and a colleague and I wrote a long form document. And then this is the talk that's sort of based off of that. And I won't get too much into on-call horror stories. We'll save those for the end. If you are interested in those kinds of things, one of my colleagues at Azure, Jay Gordon, has a podcast that he ran for a while called On-Call Nightmares. That is actually pretty interesting if you're into that kind of. For me, it gives me PTSD flashbacks, so I kind of stay away from that. But he's got a few good episodes in that. So we're going to talk about on-call and what it is, just for set the baseline, right? So in the basic sense, on-call is you've got folks in your organization that you want to have available to look at problems, answer questions, whatever it is, sort of unplanned events that happen maybe after hours, but also during the day when they would normally be working on other things. And in the early days of the commercial internet, so like way back in the before times, before lots of folks had access to reliable mobile data services on their phones, companies would provide their employees with a text-based one-way or two-way pager, and that's where PagerDuty gets its name. So like when I first joined AOL, which was the job I had before I joined Chef, my pager had been owned by somebody else. It had been passed around the department, and someone had signed it up for news alerts. So like my pager, when I first got it, was going off all the time. It was completely insane. So thankfully, those days are long gone, and we can configure our alerts and all those things through some smarter gear than what we used to have. But really, that was sort of the early genesis of PagerDuty's name and where the service got started and all those kinds of things. So why do we bother doing this, right? If our teams are responsible for, consumer-facing services, you probably know that, users do weird things and they do them at weird times. We didn't really expect people to be doing their banking or ordering groceries at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, but like now, especially, that's just kind of how life is, right? So our goals is to, we're not focused on punishing people for bad code. It's a recognition that, as we put more things online and we offer more services, that things become more complex. And especially when you have digital distributed services and microservices architectures and all of these complex ecosystems, things go wrong, and they go wrong in unpredictable ways. So we have some method for bringing our subject matter experts online when we need them to answer questions and deal with problems. So we set up on call to bring our SMEs in at the beginning of an incident or an issue or whatever the problem is. And then we want to reduce the kind of chaos and the drama that surrounds having incidents in the first place. And that's a whole other set of practices, though, around what we call incident response, but it still plays into this. We also want to minimize the time it takes to acknowledge an incident is going on and then to resolve it with the right people. And we want to minimize how many times I have to like tell someone else what's going on. If I'm not the right person to be solving the issue, every time I have to go find someone else, I have to re-explain it and redetermine if the person I'm talking to is the right person. But if that person who's the right person is already on call and has already been alerted, then I can reduce how many times that has to happen. And it's all towards, keeping things online and keeping things running happily as much as possible. So we know that increasingly every business is a digital business. Even before the pandemic, lots of things were moving more online. And then last year, everybody's online because nobody can go anywhere. So all this stuff ends up being, powered by digital services and other technology. And we know our consumers, whether they're internal customers or external customers, they want convenience and speed and personalized experience when they're using all of our applications. And for the competitive nature of the industry right now, like that has to be, all that stuff has to be there on time. It has to be fast. It has to be what people are expecting all the time. So we're figuring out how to teach engineers how to code and ship and own their services in production to improve the organization's ability to ship features quickly to the right people at the right time. And when something goes wrong, make sure we can fix it as fast as possible. So we talked to a number of companies that are really just getting at this for the first time. And for a lot of folks, this feels like old hat, right? But as more folks are bringing more of their technology stack in-house, they're doing more internal development rather than sort of outsourcing things. We see a lot more places where, who's going to do this and why are they going to do it? So who ends up going on call? And we talked about, Matt had some things about DevOps in the intro slides. And like, yeah, in the bad old days, the application team handed over their code. Maybe it was in a tarball, maybe it wasn't even that nice, and gave it to operations and said, here, good luck, go for it. Here's maybe a list of a couple of instructions on how to get it installed, but here you can figure it out, do whatever. And so when we talked about who at that point went on call and who responded to things, it was mostly these sort of operations folks who hadn't written the code and probably don't have that skill set. Their skill set is sort of completely disjoint from what it took to actually create those applications. And so that created a lot of stress, a lot of strife, and it delays the time to resolve for a lot of these things. It's also possible then too to talk about, everyone in the organization participating in on-call, just kind of depending on what they do. It's not outside their realm of possibility that you might want your marketing team also to have responders on alert in case something does go wrong. And you want to say, well, we have an issue with this service, so don't do this marketing campaign today. Don't push this ad, or don't send this email until we know this thing works. So there's a lot of additional uses for sort of this on-call methodology. So as more teams are exploring DevOps and are talking about SRE models and all this kind of stuff, you get a wider range of individual contributors who wouldn't be on call in the old model, who are now picking up on-call responsibilities. And for some of them, this is not a welcome change, and that's totally understandable. But we have, the most impactful thing for resolving your issues is really putting those application development teams, giving them a larger role when it comes to, taking care of the code they write once it reaches production, and what that means when it actually starts its beneficial life, right? So code in your repository is just text in some files, but once it gets into production, then it's part of your user experience and part of maybe your financial flow, right? So one thing to keep in mind is that when we put more responders on call, we really want to focus them in on their areas of expertise, right? We have a concept we call full service ownership, which is really establishing the place for your application developers to work within incident response and ownership of the service and what it means for the service to even have an incident and all those kinds of definitions. And then, but we also want to translate that for the whole organization, so that depending on how robust your model is, that also improves your response and improves all the downstream things from it. So for your on-call teams, you really want to assign them responsibilities for the stuff they know best, because it's really just about pinpointing that expertise as quickly as possible. Some of the benefits then for these new teams is that they know when they're going to be on call. One of the drawbacks of not having a regimented on-call program is that you can call anybody at any time. If I'm the system and I'm struggling with a problem on a service, I'm going to call the person in development I know best. And everybody might call the same person. So you get to the point where, like, well, we know Brian will answer his phone, so we're going to call Brian all the time. And that's not fair to Brian, right? He has the rest of his team that should be also have some kind of responsibilities as well. And he likes sleep as much as anybody. So having a plan for who needs to be available, when they're going to be available, who to call for every service that's out there, and then knowing exactly what you might be called for. Because, like, I'm not going to call my application developers if the problem is with, the AWS layer. I'm going to call my SRE team or my infrastructure team for that. If I have a security problem, I'm going to call my security team. But if I have an application problem, something's in the logs or in the runtime, if something else is alerted, then I want to be able to find those people as fast as possible. And then we can also modify our schedules and be really, proactive about what the services need and how to best support them, right? So maybe my team chooses, they have some applications that don't really need 24/7 support. So we can schedule rotations appropriately. There might be models where you can have 8x5, if all of your users are in work hours in the same time zone, that totally works. You might have 24/5 if they're a little bit more expanded, depending on your application. You might luck out with a follow the sun model, right? Because, like, Berlin is 9 hours ahead of Seattle, so you can spread those out and minimize the amount of time that people might be on call when they really should be asleep, right? So there's a lot of flexibility then that you can have when you're being prescriptive and actually saying, yes, these teams are going to be on call, rather than just waiting for somebody to be randomly called during a problem. Something else we recommend is a handoff meeting, and this helps folks really put their knowledge around what's going on and the status of things in production, right? So at the end of an on-call shift, it's good to have some kind of, formal handoff, acknowledging that person one is coming off on call and person two is taking it up. So maybe have a meeting where the outgoing responder summarizes incidents, or maybe an email or a shared document, or maybe you just have a saved query in your incident response platform that highlights anything current or recent and how they were handled. And this really gives the oncoming person a lot of support, right? As they figure out, what maybe there was recent deployments that might still be bubbling up issues. Maybe there are still unsolved incidents that are running that haven't been completely solved yet. Maybe there's queued work to be done from the prior incidents to remediate them fully. Maybe there's been changes to documents or access or where things are located. People love to move stuff around in a wiki, right? Just for reasons. So knowing that that has happened. And also important staff changes and contact updates. If the responder on another team is leaving, you know that you might have somebody new over there to work with. Then we talk about, how to set up folks for equipment, right? And prior to last year, this was a bigger deal, I think, for a lot of organizations than it is now, because a lot of folks weren't working from home. They didn't have work provided equipment. But if your folks are going to be on call and you're asking them to be ready to go, at any given time, they really should have, a company provided laptop with all of the security things installed. Some companies will provide some kind of incentive for mobile data or phone access or access to the internet or any of those kinds of things. And that's a good practice. And other places also will be a little bit more generous with things like extra monitors, backup access maybe to the cloud or like a local disk drive or any of those other kinds of things that they would have access to in the office. You really want them to have access to at home, especially if you're not used to having them work at home. And then another checklist to create with your team is really, what things do you need? What kind of stuff do you have to have in case something does go wrong in the middle of the night? You don't want to be clamoring for a bunch of things. If I wake up at 3 a.m. in response to an alert and I find that I don't have access to some application, I don't want to have to call my help desk and make them super grumpy at 3:15 to grant me some access to things. So having a checklist of all the stuff that your team needs access to is a good idea for onboarding anyway. But even if you haven't hired someone in a while, just going through that list and making sure that exactly who's had access granted to what and what they need and how the systems hang together and how all that stuff works is a really good idea to sort of keep that going, especially for things like your monitoring and your dashboards, which some organizations still like to put behind passwords or divide them up into silos and all that kind of stuff that can delay your response. You want to break down those barriers as quick as possible. And then something else to talk about with your teams is, setting some team norms. And some of these get a little controversial, but hopefully they all sort of make sense. But, being clear about what you're expecting folks to do, especially if this is the first time they're going to be on call. So your application developers who aren't used to this kind of responsibility, what are we asking them to do? They're going to recognize that there's an alert, whether on their phone or some other method, and they're going to acknowledge it. Then they're going to do a bit of triage. If they can fix it, then they can fix it and resolve it and move on towards prevention or whatever your workflow is. Sometimes it's just to put a JIRA ticket in or a card in the Kanban board or whatever so that it goes into the workflow to be fixed permanently. Sometimes they need to be able to contact other teams, right? We call this never hesitate to escalate. If you need additional help, if you need someone from another team that has different expertise, if you're digging around in your Java logs and you find out that there's a problem with the network attached storage or some other piece of equipment in your ecosystem, then you want to be able to contact those folks as fast as possible. So not delaying any kind of additional mobilization for other folks that are going to help you then resolve and prevent that episode the next time. But there's also stuff that you don't want folks to do, right? You don't want what we call on-call martyrs, right? So your responder's not necessarily going to be able to resolve absolutely everything they ever see. There are going to be times when you're going to have to ask for help, or the alert came in and it maybe is assigned wrong, needs to be cleaned up in that way. You don't have to solve absolutely everything themselves. They also don't have to sit on every incident. And this is one of my on-call horror stories. I was told to actually sit and wait for some back-end team to resolve an incident because my front-end applications was a consumer of it. it ended up being 4 days of outage. So like that's 4 wasted days of sitting on a thing waiting for someone else to fix their problem. And we don't want that. That's a waste of resources in our organizations. Basically, if we know I can't solve this thing, I can sign up for updates or be notified some other way. In PagerDuty, we call this stakeholders, and go back to sleep or go back to work or whatever it is that I'm doing and be updated later. I don't have to be on that call for however many hours it stretches into. We also don't want them to spend every waking moment on alerts. Some folks are really, will check the thing all the time and be super nervous about it. And, you know, it's hard to break away from that. But we want to say, you know, if you're already engaged in an alert, go ahead and pass it on to somebody else. If you're burned out during a shift, there should be a process for someone else to help them pick something up so that, you know, people can get some food, that they can sleep, that they can, you know, take a shower of all things, you know, anything like that to help everybody recover from all of these. And then the one big one, that blue one there, this is my pound the table sort of topic for this, is that you cannot keep a regular workload while you are working on unplanned work, because on-call is work. You just don't know what it's going to be in advance. So having a regular workload, especially for application engineers, the weeks that they are on call out of a 2 or 4 week sprint, they're not going to be able to do as many tickets off the board. They're going to be doing as many stories. You want to be able to reduce the amount of regular planned work that they're expected to do while they're focusing on unplanned work. So that's a big one to remember when we're expecting, you know, software engineers to be part of our on-call and response teams. And I think it's one of the hardest ones that comes up for folks. They're not used to thinking about it that way. And it impacts other stuff too. Like you may not have time to do interviews for a hiring cycle. You may not have time to participate in other like employee resource groups or other activities. You may not have the time to do like mentoring and other work-related tasks that you would normally have time to do. So it's important to like pace yourself and don't burn out during your shift. So then we want to look at, you know, what kinds of things contribute to a positive on-call culture, because you're asking people to do a lot here, right? You're digging into their personal time. You're asking them, you know, in some cases to be awake in the middle of the night. So one thing we definitely talk about a lot is empathy. Even our CEO talks about this, you know, having empathy for the rest of your team. You know, teams and individuals need to feel empowered to make their decisions quickly. They want to remediate incidents without a fear of reprisal. During incident, there's this mentality shift for, you know, things are okay to things are not okay. And for some folks, you know, that's super easy, and other folks have a hard time with that. You may feel that they're sort of over responding or they're really stressed out about it. And that definitely happens. We need our empathy to extend beyond the incident to the day-to-day ways in which our teammates interact. It's important to remember, you know, if someone was up overnight on a lot of incidents, it's okay for them to sleep in, and it's all right to like not monitor someone's on the clock at 9 a.m. if they were up half the night. So dealing with, you know, all the professionalism that we expect of folks. We also talk about this as psychological safety. And I think I think I put this slide in every talk that we do. Like we just kind of copy it around because it is so important to absolutely everything, right? And, you know, at the basic level, psychological safety is a shared belief held by the members of the team that the team is a safe place for interpersonal risk-taking. So people aren't afraid of being made fun of. They aren't afraid of being ridiculed. They aren't afraid of like the devil's advocate walking in and asking a lot of pointless questions. It's a place where people can really have a discussion without the risk of feeling insecure or embarrassed. And there's a lot of good research on this that originally came out of the Google Teams study. I know Tom is really big on this too. We'll probably talk about it later. So it's super important, especially when you're dealing with high stress situations with something like an on-call response and those kinds of situations. Other things to think about when you're bringing your team on is onboarding. And we create shadow rotations. And this is super interesting. It's kind of like a listen-only mode, right? Where someone new to the team is going to be in the on-call rotation, but they're not responsible for like solving anything or fixing anything. They're really just there to watch and learn, right? Because sometimes there'll be things that they haven't seen before, how to find data in the wiki, even how to dig into some of the features of your platform, your monitoring and your metrics collection, where your run books are, all those kinds of things that, you know, it's one thing to walk through when there's nothing going on, and it's another thing to really dig into it when there is an actual issue. So we have folks go through this sort of shadow rotation, so they get this sort of low stress introduction to how they should be responding. And then we want to talk about with our teams, you know, what we're actually after. Why are we doing this, right? Like, what are our metrics on this? We talk about MTTA and MTTR, which are kind of the staid old guards of metrics for this stuff. So we have mean time to acknowledge and mean time to resolve. They're kind of, I would say, blunt instruments when you take them at face value, right? They maybe don't reflect what is most important in your response team. They're good basic metrics though. And if you're not collecting anything like this, it's a good place to start. But as your team gets a little bit more seniority and a little more sophisticated, you can start to break them down, right? And say, okay, for P1 or severity 1 issues, our mean time to resolve is this, and we need to improve that. For severity 2, severity 3 issues, our mean time to resolve is this, and it's okay for right now. So you can sort of break things down and give yourself a little bit more granularity towards what your goals are for response times. And we talk in a few other places about, you know, Sev 1 and Sev 2 and all those kinds of things. And those can be very individualized to an organization. We kind of break them down that most of your things are going to be things that affect your customers, affect your financial flow, whatever your income is. Usually that stuff is linked to your most severe things. Other metrics that might relate to how fast you get things done are things like escape defects, right? Your whole entire software development lifecycle plays into how fast you can get something fixed. And that impacts operational issues as well. If you have a bug or a problem that affects just the operations of your application, you want that fixed as fast as possible because you want to reduce the number of future events that will spawn from that particular thing. So just to reiterate, you know, never hesitate to escalate, you know, but knowing who you're going to call is crucial when you're streamlining all these complicated communications, right? So to ensure you're reaching out to the correct groups, you really want to check that everything that you're interacting with has some defined team that's going to respond to it. This is a piece of infrastructure hygiene that can sometimes be delayed, right? But you want to make sure that as you have new applications coming online, or maybe you're decommissioning things or passing them into sustaining engineering, that you're keeping all that data updated so that everybody knows who knows the most and who's going to respond if there's an issue. Don't keep, like we mentioned before, don't keep the wrong people involved, send them on their way. You know, they can be alerted later. Focus on the folks who can actually fix the issue, but you keep your other stakeholders informed out of band. There's whole other methodologies for even your customers and keeping them informed on those kinds of things. We also want to make sure that our team knows how to initiate a major incident. It's one thing to be responding to like little issues or even big issues about the things that are just our team. But if there's lots of applications in our ecosystem, there's like potentially a larger impact for any of the things that go wrong. So you want to make sure that folks know how to kick off a major incident and initiate that response. At PagerDuty, we have incident commanders. You page an incident commander and they fire up this whole process. And the sort of this machine comes to life with Slack channels and a Zoom call and all of these other things happen to know that there's, you know, a red alert basically going on, that something that we found maybe in some small pocket actually has a larger blast radius than we thought it did. So we can do that. So talk a little bit then about etiquette and setting expectations. And this is one of the places where we had the most questions from some of our customers about, you know, how do you talk about some of this stuff for your team, right? So we talk about humane on-call. Like my background is definitely an inhumane on-call, lots of bad experiences there, but your team really is made up of humans. Humans need sleep. If your on-call rotations include overnight responsibilities, You really have to manage workloads accordingly so that folks can catch sleep when they need to. You cannot force responders who are awake overnight to still be available regular work hours the next day. That is absolutely a recipe for burnout and low morale. So when you're establishing on-call for a new team, you want to set expectations and some ground rules, right? You might think about things like making sure people can reschedule around planned events. Maybe you say at least a week in advance. No one wants to miss a kid's birthday party for on-call. That just sucks, right? That's just terrible for work-life balance and for employee morale and all of those things. Back when we used to commute, like you might not have signal underground in a train or in a tube or a tunnel. So letting a backup know if you're going to be temporarily unavailable, even if it's a busy on-call and you want to take a shower, right? Like just let your on-call know. You need to put your pager or your phone in a baggie and hang it on the shower wall. You just let somebody know that you're going to be unavailable for 10 minutes or whatever to take a shower. You also want to set guidelines for folks to delay their workday if they were up overnight. So many hours of awake, then come in at 11 a.m. or whatever it is. You also want to think about a process for rolling folks off the primary if the shift has been really busy or really stressful. So if your on-call starts Monday morning and somebody's up overnight, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, by Thursday, their brain is mush and they're not going to be useful to you anymore. So think about what would happen there and giving them, a day off or switching the shift around or some other kind of preemptive thing so that number one, you don't burn those folks out, but you still have somebody who has some brain power left at the end of the week to be your responder. So we always recommend erring on the side of creating more shifts of a shorter duration if the services are very noisy, just to give people time to recover from that stuff. The sleep absolutely is necessary. And then talk to your team about, your expectations for responsibilities, right? No one person should be taking a disproportionate amount of your on-call duties. Your platform should have, some kind of reports on this to let you know who's had the most on-call hours, who's been woken up overnight the most, all those kinds of things. It's also important to manage your coverage for major holidays. If you work in a cross-cultural team, that might work itself out naturally. So people might have different holidays that they celebrate. In North America, we have teams in the US and Canada. So everybody gets their own Thanksgiving off because the US and Canada have different Thanksgiving days. So no one has to fight for that. So you can actually take advantage of some of those differences across your team. But be very conscious that, the same team members aren't working the same holidays year after year after year. Hopefully your on-call platform will provide you then with, like I said, all those reports, and then talk about good behaviors, right? And this is one where the conversation can get a little sticky, right? Because we all know that folks like a good afternoon at the pub, after the workday, and it's hard to respond with your best brain function if you've already been for 6 pints and a punch-up before you go home, right? So thinking about what you want to have the conversation maybe with your team about, people should be sober enough to respond and do work when they're on call. In the US, we're facing this a bit more with cannabis as it becomes legalized. That's folks like to participate and that's great. And but we are asking them to watch it, right, when they're on call. It's a weird and awkward conversation to have, but it's so common. It was a letter in the Ask a Manager blog, and if you don't read that blog, it's a lot of really good like managerial advice and stuff like that. But she did have a writer write in a few years ago about responding to an incident, and the other person there was obviously had been partaking of something, right? So we don't want our folks to do that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, make sure I just want to reiterate, like lowering your regular workload during on-call weeks, just to help folks with their time management and their stress levels and all of those kinds of things. All that will help you, avoid burnout. You want to monitor your team health. Our agile leadership team actually has some metrics and things that they've documented that they kind of keep an eye on for this. And there's a number of different recommendations for those things. Then you also want to be able to work with your peers on systemic improvement across your ecosystem, especially in microservices environments where you have like dozens of things all interconnected. You want to be able to, have conversations with the next team over if their service is giving you grief, right? And then, make sure you're extending that empathy to all of your team members as they're, it can be really stressful for people to be added to on-call. It can cause stress in their home life if they weren't expecting to have on-call responsibilities originally, and this is something that's being added to their job. So there's a lot of things to talk about there. So a couple of implementation suggestions. Make sure you're managing alert fatigue. That's step one. Clear out duplicate alerts. Clean up everything that can't be actioned on. Complete and make sure your documentation is all current, right? That includes your response plays, includes any kind of run books or other things in your wiki or whatever it is. Make sure your alerts, if they have external dependencies, talk to your peers on those teams for shared responsibility. You might be able to monitor your systems, but alert the other team for issues, right? So pass that off to the people who can fix it. Clear up your noisy alerts. Prioritize permanent fixes for troublesome issues. That includes, talking to your product management about operational issues impact the quality of the product. Disable junk alerts. Anything that can't be fixed, that doesn't have customer impact, even if it impacts a small number of customers, maybe you found that they're not part of your paying customer base, and you can ignore alerts while that thing's deprioritized. When you're talking about bringing folks onto on-call the first time, start your journey with your most stable services, right? You might have stuff that is really unstable and you still want help from the folks who are used to being on call, and that's fine. Prioritize your customer-facing services, and then be really ruthless about the prioritization of the services that you do have. Decide what requires a high level of response, and don't over-assign high priorities to services that don't require them. If you have a traditional knock, and the last time I was on call, I had a knock as my L1. So that's how long ago that was. These are fewer and far between, but if you do have one, right, assign them as your level 1, make use of them. Most knocks are still 24/7. They're staffed around the clock. They have, at least some level of knowledge of getting around in your systems and doing those things. You can give them, better tools, something like Rundeck, which allows them to automate and push things around that they wouldn't necessarily have access to. And then cross-train them as your incident commanders, right? This is another whole practice that they could take over for you, because they know, where the Slack channels are going to be, where the Zoom call is going to be, and all those good things. And then to reiterate, work on your flexible models, especially if you have folks in different time zones. Make sure you're making use of that. Some of our customer service folks, their week starts in Sydney in the morning on Monday and extends to San Francisco on Friday night. So there's really only about 36-ish hours so there's sort of basic things that are escalated only and not have regular daytime response. So take advantage of that. Use different models as appropriate for your services, and partner with different teams. I know lots of folks have gone with this 2 pizza teams. You only have a handful of people that are working on your feature set. But if you have another team next to you that works on similar code, similar kinds of systems, the same versions of things, the same runtimes, same tool set, buddy up, right? Because that can extend your on-call rotation from 6 people to 12 people to give your folks more time to acclimate and less time on call. And then talk to your team about good behavior. Set your standards, establish your goals, don't hesitate to escalate, save the drinking for the weeks you're not on call. So a couple of additional resources, things that we liked. We have a bunch of stuff about this. It's kind of all over the place. There's a bunch of stuff there that we have on the PagerDuty site, but interestingly too, there's a lot of industry stuff that's really good. So the first one here is the Increment Magazine. Hopefully you know about that. It's published by Stripe. The very first issue was about on-call, and there's so much good stuff in there. Alice Goldfuss has an open source on-call handbook that has a lot of good stuff. And then the second to last one there's a talk from a Velocity conference, and I think 2014, it's aged at this point, but Etsy did a quantifying their on-call called mean time to sleep. And the talk was really good and really data-driven, but they showed up in pajamas. So, you know, it's a little bit of fun for talking about all of this. And then finally, the last line there is actually where you can find all this documentation online. It's going on call to PagerDuty.com. So if you're working with teams who aren't used to this and are, you know, hesitant or reluctant, you know, point them in our direction. We're happy to help at any time. So that's my talk. So thank you.
Excellent, brilliant, Mandi. Thank you so much. Everybody else on the call, if you want to just come off mute briefly and just give Mandi a little round of applause. I know it doesn't work very well, but I think it's a good thing to do.
Thank you.
Hi, very nice talk, by the way, and really, could we have the slides afterwards if that's fine?
Oh yeah, I'll post them somewhere and let the guys know.
Cool. Thanks, Mandi. Thanks, Ahmed.
Thank you much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Anybody got any questions specifically for Mandi off the back of the talk? Tom Wilkins, are you still there? Link to the manager blog. Sorry, I'm not quite sure which one you were talking about there.
That's all right. I got that one. That one's there.
Askamanager.org. Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's easy then. Cool.
I have, sorry, I was about to ask a question. Is that okay?
Please do, Dushyant. Yes.
Sure. So I have two questions, Mandi. First of all, thank you very much. The talk was really good. And so I'm working in a team, and in this company, traditionally, there has been two teams. So essentially one development team does the work and then the operations team does the on-call, which is going to change. So we are slowly adopting left shift. So is there any tips that you can give us that you think we're going to hit and we're going to regret, or we're going to have to work around? And the second part of the question is, due to compliance, I think I understand it's mainly due to compliance, not all dev teams have access to resources. They don't have full access. We deploy to Azure and other cloud. They don't have full access to resources. What happens when they go on call? Do you think they will need access, or how do you work around this from compliance perspective?
Okay, so the first one, I think the first step I would sort of recommend is have your folks shadow the people who are on call now, right? Like just take that as a practice, just to see what they're seeing, see the tools, the way they use them, because it's usually a different kind of workflow, and like just get them acclimated, especially for, you know, what to expect and how things work and where to find stuff, and just will also help you know what they can and can't have access to, what they do and don't currently have access to. So you can like start that really at any time, just to get folks started. You can even just do that during the workday, right? Because there's still going to be things coming in during the workday without necessarily shadowing overnight. You can really just kind of start folks kind of slow. As far as compliance stuff goes, one of the things that comes up there is you may end up segregating your on-call response based on those requirements. Like you may keep your application folks on call for certain things that they can see, and your platform folks on call for things that they're allowed to access. You can also then use, and I don't think I have good documentation on this at my fingertips, but so PagerDuty bought a company called Rundeck last year that does sort of call it borrowing expertise, but what it also allows you to do is segregate and encode authorizations into the automation, so that for certain things that you know people are going to need to be able to do, you put it into the automation, and then the human being doesn't have access to it, but the little, you know, automation robots are able to go into the production systems and see things and do the work that way. So you don't necessarily have to use Rundeck. That's just the one that we work with, but there's other tools that can allow you to do that as well, whether you encode it into something like an Ansible playbook that will allow you to do certain things as well, and sort of get it to the abstract level where those folks are able to make changes as part of a workflow, or, you know, make triage tasks as part of a workflow that keeps them away from that substrate.
Right. No, that does answer the question. We are actually looking at Azure PIM, the identity management called privilege or something, can't remember the first bit. Essentially, get access for a limited time, and so maybe that is the answer. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Do that too, absolutely.
Fabulous. Thank you, Mandi. Thank you, Dushyant. Hope I pronounced your name correctly there. Anybody else got any questions for Mandi? Going once, going twice, sold. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so let's move on then. So yeah, well, again, yes, thank you. Excellent talk, Mandi. I've made a lot of notes there of things that I want to go and quiz our people about tomorrow, actually. So let's move on to the panel session. I want to bring in a couple of other people here now. First of all, we've got Tom Geraghty from Red Hat. Are you there, Tom?
Hi.
Have I said your name correctly?
Yeah, spot on. Well done.
Well, that's a relief. Brilliant. Great to meet you. Thank you for coming onto the panel. Did you want to just say hello, who you are, what you're up to?
Yeah, cool. So hi everyone. I'm Tom. I'm a transformation lead at Red Hat, and like Mandi, I started in ops as a sysadmin about 20 years ago, and since then I've worked in and managed technology and dev teams and DevOps teams and stuff, and I've got a lot of experience in various kinds of on-call and various horror stories, largely in fact, yeah, some good ones from when I led technology in a large concert venue, from things like flying elephants suddenly stopping due to Wi-Fi interference, to server room fires, to network blackouts that could have caused a toxic ammonia gas explosion covering the East Midlands, and Justin Bieber.
I like how you tack Justin Bieber onto the end of that. Yeah, yeah. Today's not a good day to be talking about server room fires, is it? Yeah. Interesting background. Again, I've got a similar one, but we're not here to talk about me. Yeah, miss all those admin days. And also, Mark's around. Mark, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Mark is here as well. So we know who Mark is.
Yeah.
I've shared an on-call rotor with Mark. Definitely somebody I want to have my back. Thank you. Cool. So yeah, we're just going to kick off, kick some ideas around the room a bit. Anybody else on the call who we haven't spoken to yet, if you want to contribute to the discussion, then please do. If you want to fire a question at any of the people on the panel, or the panel in general, which generally works better, please do either come off mute or stick it in the chat. I wanted to, now we've done the intros, I wanted to just kick off and start talking about some of the things that have come up in my world over the last few years around on-call. And I want to talk about like on-call teams and like dedicated on-call teams. I work for an organization that's getting large, and we're now looking at things like, well, we've got so many people on call, and like it's almost like every single team's got somebody on call, and at some point all these teams, we've got about 20 people who are on call all at the same time doing different things. So various people want to construct an on-call team and put it in a relatively inexpensive part of the world, so that they can handle all the first line stuff. Is that a good idea? Anybody got any views on that?
I would say it's everything. It depends, right? I would say normally 40 to 50% of the on-call incidents that I've been in could be easily solved by some fairly standard analysis of the problem, right? So if let's say, if you pay them to do that first time analysis and run some scripts, then why not, right? I've been in some companies that have done that they've been successful at that in a way that it reduces the amount of times that people that are level 2, level 3 that actually you need the next day to be available and give the best during the office hours that might need to resolve incidents, right? But the drawback of that, in my sense, is that if you put people that are not aware of the day-to-day of the systems, they don't know when they need to hand over, right? They might run the script and they think it's solved, but it might not be solved. So that's a high risk in that sense. So it's I said, that's why it really depends. Personally, I would say if it's a critical operation site and there's some ways that you can solve for that. But like I had one where we had 8 guys to solve the problem of a company that was bidding 35 billion pounds a year, right? So it doesn't scale. In that case, it was useful. Where in other cases, when you actually spread handle on call and every team has someone on call, then it makes a lot more sense.
Cool, thanks, Mark. Anybody else got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I basically agree with Mark. I mean, you're at that point, like it feels like you're just trying to replace a level 1 knock, which a lot of folks are moving away from for all those reasons. Like you want your expertise there, and like some amount of the stuff that your L1 is going to be able to do, you can replace with automation, right? So some of the things that are going to be there, your alert can actually, rather than talking to a human, can kick off a script or some other piece of automation that can do the first level of restarting the service or moving files off the disk or any of those like common things that your L1 would be easily able to handle anyway. So that the investment handoff there is different, I guess, or something to think about, whether you really want to be hiring additional people for that work, or if it's something that you can automate and then keep your most knowledgeable SMEs in the line there.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. Pip's raised a valid point there. If you're handing off on-call support for things that are well understood, they should be things that can just be automated. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's an interesting one when you look at I remember going back a long time in my career, just fixing the same sort of things over and over again. You're like, why are we not actually properly fixing this thing? And it comes down to, well, because there's a load of technical debt, perhaps. You have to re-engineer something, and actually it going down and waking you up every now and again isn't the worst thing in the world, which is not something I was ever particularly comfortable with. But it can be a reality in a lot of places. So yeah, you end up with these situations coming in where you're like automating fixes. But it takes a fairly self-aware organization to allow that, I think, because otherwise they're like, well, no, fix it properly. Why are we putting these band-aids on? Sorry, plasters for the UK audience, instead of actually fixing the real problem. And yeah, in the world just isn't like that. Don't tell them. Yeah, good idea, Pip. What they don't know won't hurt them, right? Okay. Anybody want to pursue that anymore?
I'll chip in, Matt, and say to that, I back in the days when I worked on BBC iPlayer, I developed an entire automated workaround for things that went wrong, and I got to the point where I even gave it to the non-technical ops people to press a button if something had broken. So even in a high-profile platform like that, everyone was watching. It does happen. And it's fine. It's honestly, it makes you cringe a bit, but if it's the best option from a practical and financial perspective, then it really is. Yeah,
and for example, I worked in a bank recently, and if people knew how banks work internally, everybody would have money under the mattresses, right? But the problem there was more about domain of responsibility and separation of duties, in the sense that in order to be compliant and risk adverse, you needed to have actually people that only took on call. And the reason of that is that you didn't want anyone to have full control of the end-to-end, because that would go against the governance of the regulator, because nobody should be able to see the whole puzzle in that sense. It's a bit arcane and old-fashioned, but in that sense, you had to.
Yeah, the rules are the rules, right? Yeah, interesting. Picking up on what you said, Paul. What do we all think about when you kind of make these elastoplast things, and they hit this button to restart it and get it restarted before anyone notices? It doesn't matter. Does that have a negative effect on actually getting the problems actually really fixed, or do we just never have any hope of having them fixed in the first place?
Yeah, it can. Like if you have something that is chronically bad, you can end up turning an alert into a metric, right? Instead. So rather than saying, you know, service X is misbehaving, it alerted us 24 times in the last 36 hours, you say, okay, here's, instead of an alert, you have a metric that we're now gearing towards. And that's something that then you can hopefully report up to your product manager or to other folks who are going to be in a place to prioritize the work to finally fix it, especially if you know what the impact of those disruptions are. And for some backend services in a microservice environment, you may not know exactly what you're impacting if something goes down and comes back up. But hopefully you have some idea of what the flow is, that we know X number of customers are using this particular feature at this given time. When that happens, it restarts itself, you know, all the time, and can start to put some data around what's actually going on there so it can be prioritized and fixed. And you take the humans out of it and just pipe it into your metrics collection instead.
I think on that, Matt, I'd say that even an automated workaround has both a human resource impact and especially in the world of cloud, it has a cost impact. So, you know, I really think that you know, if you're doing that sort of thing and you want to make sure the proper fix goes in, you need to add up the cost of those things and say, you know, this is a temporary fix. It's costing us this much to keep this fix going. And therefore, there is still a case for doing it as it were properly. I hate to use the word properly because I think it's overused, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and also especially with microservices, and systems have become a lot more a chain of events and a chain of pulls in a way. So I had one of those where, let's say, Java was consuming a lot of memory, as it always does. And as soon as you got to a certain amount of memory, we'd restart the server, right? But that actually did hide a ticking bomb problem because nobody realized, because it didn't give enough time for that problem to develop. So, and at some point with the volume of traffic that we had, that problem just boomed and we were in a very bad situation. So I would say that I like restarting things. It's not a bad thing inherently, but it can hide problems that can blow in your face as well. So it's always that balance.
Mm. I think Paul mentioned something about like cost and sort of the like prioritization of fixing, which, and I think this is really, really important to think about, because, and this is why I think it's also really important to sometimes include managers on call, even though like they're not going to be able to fix anything, but they need to see it. They need to see and feel some of this pain, because if you've got some of those common problems or some of this stuff going on that just, you know, someone just hits a red button and it gets fixed, and it happens a lot. That's the sort of stuff that goes under the radar. And it's sometimes only when you get managers on the on-call process that they see, oh shit, yeah, we do need to fix that. Yeah, okay, here's the time, here's the priority.
Yeah, it's a battle we've been fighting for a while, isn't it? Getting people to actually acknowledge that that you've got development teams and they're busy and they've had their current sprint planned out and they know what they're doing for the next 2 weeks, and we've got 600 things in the backlog, so we know what they're doing for the next 6 months. And what do you mean we need to spend some time on not delivering features? And
especially if the fix has been there for 4 years, then the longer the fix is there, the lower the priority gets, because it's like, well, it's been there for 5 years now, it's fine.
Yeah. And eventually the system gets obsoleted and the fix is still there, and it goes down and look, we didn't have to fix that. Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, right. we all have heard about the temporary fix that is there 10 years after.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They're the only reliable bits of the system, aren't they? All right, so just going back to the comments, David, depends what you want to have on call. Acknowledgement of the problem. Oh, sorry, I missed that earlier. Sorry, David. That was about whether you should have a team for this or not. So yeah, having a team that could acknowledge problems and escalations, yeah, there's value in that. Good stuff. Pip, fixes that are just for the weekend get forgotten. Yeah, people move on. Yeah, and suddenly you don't know how this system is architected anymore. Yeah. All right. So Capiel, quick question. Do you guys use a change control when it comes to restarting and fixing things? Well, I'll give a quick opinion on that and then open it up. No, I won't actually. Sorry, I should open it up. Change control, fixing and restarting things. Do we need that? Mark, you're dying to say something pithy here.
I think this kind of weirdly this kind of comes back to ITIL, and I never refer to ITIL, but I think this is where you can start to talk about normal changes, standard changes, and emergency changes. If it's an emergency change, it doesn't need to go through change control.
Yeah, exactly. Not only that, but also if it's something that, and if it's something that it's only happens in, let's say, one container, one VM, and the other 9 function equally, I'm just going to take my gun and blow it in the face. So in that sense, it really depends on the background. For some companies, you need a change audit and an emergency change request and all of that. But that's, I would say, less and less the case nowadays because you can automate all of that.
Yeah, or report it after the fact and get retroactive approval or whatever from that. Yeah.
Nice.
If it's something chronic, you should be monitoring it and measuring it anyway. But like if it's just a one-off, just blow it and then go.
And actually, that comes back to your point earlier, Mandy, about psychological safety, because the people doing this stuff need to know that they can do that stuff without being blamed for making the wrong call.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, encompassing the psychological safety, there's if the company's not thinking about what are you allowed to do, you're wading with your size 9s. There's a problem. Well, just reboot everything, terminate every instance in an auto-scaling group so they all come back. Is that the right thing to do? Could be. It's a responsibility of the organisation to kind of frame that stuff, and give you, who's been woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, the confidence that the things that you're going to do are for the right reasons.
Yeah, and it kind of connects as well with the fragility and anti-fragility of the system itself, right? If you do things right, or you design the system right and it's anti-fragile, it doesn't matter how much you get it wrong, right? You should be able to, as I used to say, walk into a data center with a gun, shoot in 8 different random places, and the system should still be working, right? And that's what Chaos Monkey and Chaos Gorilla and all these different things prepare you for, because nobody should be in an on-call taking the right decisions, because to be honest, if somebody asks me at 3 a.m. what's the right decision, I'm just going to go back to bed, right? That's the only good decision at that time. So in that sense, things should be all connected in a way that it should be fairly easy, let's say, to commit errors and still resolve the situation.
Wonderful. Okay, let's pivot slightly on to getting people to do on-call. I with Mark, when we worked for Woomi back a decade ago now, I can't believe it's been that long. We had this situation where we had this mad CTO, a guy called Nick Ferrier, who a number of people here know, and he's like, let's put our developers on call. And I was like, they're not going to like that. They're not going to want to do that. And we were really lucky because we had really shit hot devs. And actually, I don't mean that they were like really good technically, even though they were, but they were great people, because we went to them and said, do you want to go on call? And they're like, well, yeah. And we're like, really? And we kind of pull apart the reasoning a bit there. And it turns out that actually they take responsibility. It comes back to that slide in the intro, giving a shit about things other than just the bit that you are focused on, from John Vincent. These guys, people, Mark, I'm sure you remember, like Alan, Ed, etc., O2, they're like, yeah, well, I don't want somebody else to be woken up in the middle of the night because something that I did isn't working right. And even more, when I see my thing not working right, then it's going to give me lots of clues as to how to fix it. I think I'm probably mashing together a few stories in one because it was a long time ago. But that seems to be the gist. And that was great. So yeah, fantastic. Woomi, devs on call, they loved it. Even after being woken up, they still loved it. In fact, they weren't really woken up very much, so they loved it even more. I don't think that's a common viewpoint. So I'm wondering, what sort of tips and tricks have you lot got for, how do you convince people to actually go on call when all they want to do is, again, a bit of a stereotype, people who just want to sit there and write some code, and you want them to wake up in the middle of the night? What?
Yeah, there's good answers in the chat. Like, we kind of skirt around this because, like, sausage making, PagerDuty doesn't offer additional pay for our teams that are on call, but I do know that some groups do, or they make it voluntary for the first X number of months. They'll have teams where the roll-on for new folks to be on call is to take volunteers across the entire engineering organization for the first 6 to 12 months to see how things work and to get the bugs worked out. So we've seen that. Definitely stipends, for folks that do that. Facebook used to be incredibly generous with their stipends. I don't know if they still are, but it used to be very, very nice. So like those are definitely options to entice people. Framing it that, like, the way we mentioned is that, your folks are probably going to get called if we blame the line of code that's giving an error anyway. They're going to get called and they just don't know it. So framing it as like, now exactly when you could be called is a helpful thing we've seen for a lot of folks, because some engineers get called all the time anyway if their code happens to be in the line of fire for some problem. So you end up reducing the amount of time they spend on call. The money.
If I hate to keep talking, Matt, because that's not my official role in this, but look, I'll tell you, 20 years ago, I had a great deal with my boss. I worked for a small company at the time. It was in the radio industry. So lots of things went wrong early in the morning when breakfast shows happened. And my deal was that if I got called before 7 a.m., I'd get the morning off for free, which was great because my phone would ring and it would be 5 in the morning and I'd be like sleeping and sort of, the first reaction is, oh, phone's ringing, and then as you ease into consciousness, you suddenly go, oh, I've got the morning off, and you're very perky, and you pick your phone up, and it was generally a client that was calling, so you'd be then happy and say, hi, how can I help you? So that was a deal that worked for me.
Yeah. It's all about motivations now. I mean, a lot of people have said, like, well, money, but I think it comes back to some of the things that Mandi said around in the presentation around the reality that if people are woken up, then they can't do as many tickets that day, and just getting the balance right there between people like itching for the phone to ring, just so, oh, fantastic, that's another 200 quid, and it being okay seems to be a key thing here, right?
You don't want to incentivize any of your arsonist firefighters, right? You want to be very careful with making sure that you don't want to pay by alert or anything like that, or be very careful on that kind of incentivization, because
I've made that mistake. I've definitely made that mistake. I used to pay people for the week that they were on call, and then a fixed amount if they actually got a call, and it did. It was actually only one person on the team. The rest of the team were fine, but yeah, one person did start to manipulate things and make quite a lot of money out of it.
Also, calling back to the earlier discussion, that does disincentivize people from fixing problems.
Yes.
Because if a problem's pretty lucrative, you don't want to fix it.
Right.
Yeah, normally I'm a lot in favor of giving time earlier, in the sense that if you're up at night 3 hours, take 3 hours whenever you want. So if you feel energized enough to come in the morning, I'm not going to stop you, right? But then you get those 3 hours and you do whatever you want with them.
Okay, so back to the comments. Used to get paid X amount to be on call pager allowance. Mac, sorry, I've known you for 12 years and I still don't know how to say your name properly. Rota worked out in such a way my on-callers get 17 days extra holiday per year. Yeah, all those sort of things can work, I guess. So cool, thank you for all of those. All right, getting towards time. I'll just finish off just going around with, have you got any tips for everyone on the panel, reducing the number of on-call incidents? Do post-mortems and things like 5 whys, do those sort of tips and tricks work to get these things minimized, or is it a fool's errand? Go on, Tom, you're nodding sagely.
So the 5 whys is interesting because the 5 whys is good. It's a good step, I mean, Mandi knows blameless postmortems are one of the most essential things to sorting out this sort of problem and building psychological safety. 5 whys is a bit linear. It results in the assumption that there is a single root cause to a problem, and there is never a single root cause to anything. So John Allsport, I think quite a while ago now, did the infinite hows, wasn't it? And so taking a more sort of qualitative, broader approach to blameless postmortems is much more valuable than trying to nail down some tiny root cause, which probably will never happen again anyway.
Yeah, and for me, the blameless postmortems have 2 advantages. One of them is that everybody learns. So normally what I do is I invite everybody in the team to the blameless postmortem. It's like, it's half an hour, let's keep it boxed, right? And we talk about it, everybody learns from it, because that way, next time they're on call, they know these things. And the other advantage, and I say the rule of 2s, right? If this happens once, fine. If this happens twice, we need to fix it at some point, and it goes to the backlog.
Yeah, it gives you an opportunity to include all the other folks that are indirectly impacted. Like, you definitely want to have your product people there, anyone who's making decisions on your feature timelines and all that kind of stuff. You also want to bring in your marketing and potentially your PR people, depending on your blast radius, so that they know, in the future, if something like this happens, this is the response we saw from the customers. You bring your customers service people in so they know proactively, if it happens again, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to handle it. All that kind of, it's an entire organization effort around, presenting your best effort, your best reliability to your customers. So it's definitely key to fixing all things.
Let's fix all the things. I think that's a good place to end. All right, brilliant. Cool. So yeah, we're about out of time now. So good panel discussion. I enjoyed that. Thank you to everyone for your input. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Paul, for stepping in as well. It's always good to hear from you. So yeah, we're about done now. So thank you to everybody who's participated tonight. Big thanks to Tom, to Mark, Paul, panelisting, everyone who questioned, everyone who asked questions. Thank you for that. It makes the events much better, having the interactivity. But yeah, biggest thanks of all to Mandi. Thank you so much for speaking and framing the event so successfully for us. Yeah, we've had a good chat, and I'm very pleased at that. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. Yeah, lots of thanks in the comments. So and again, thank you to everyone who's commented as well. It all helps make the event slightly closer to what we're traditionally used to with a physical meetup. So yeah, that's about it for now from London Devops for tonight. I think I've said all my thank yous. Thank you to Alex and Jack and Mark for helping to pull together the event. Again, yeah, I get to speak and kind of MC the thing, but there's so much hard work going on in the background to make it happen. So thank you to them, and thank you to everyone who's come. We haven't got a date yet for the next event, I don't think, but it's going to be about this time in April. In theory, again, it'll be virtual, I think. Yes, it will be virtual. So yeah, look out for the announcement coming out for that. If you'd enjoyed the meetup, you want to go and revisit anything that we've talked about, then the recording should be up soon. Can we video? Yeah, video will be up soon. So that will come up, and again, there'll be an announcement about the April meetup. If you're interested in speaking, if you're interested in paneling, please do get in touch as well. Other than that, I hope everyone's enjoyed it. I'm going to go off and have my dinner now. Just you all do too, over you in the UK. And that's it really. So thank you to everyone for coming. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone, that was great.
Cheers.
Cheers. Have a good night.
Good night.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.